Welcome back to the down below, to the depths of the silo, where I'll be recapping and discussing all of my thoughts and opinions on this week's episode of Apple TV Plus's original dystopian series. This is your cued spoiler warning that I'll be freely discussing key plot details and events, so you have been warned. And speaking of early warnings, we've got a top secret project called the Horror Exchange. There'll be a link down below if you want to be one of our founding members and subscribers to that. On with the video. So episode 5 opens up on a rather inquisitive note, which extends throughout the whole of the episode. Juliet is reading George's on-the-record file before receiving a message from Sims that Deputy Marnes has been the victim of a homicide. Yep, another death. Now that we're 5 episodes in, we're starting to get a feel for the landscape of the plot and how the story's going to pan out. People are dropping like flies at the minute in the silo, and the tonality of the show seems to be leaning towards more of a murder mystery with a dystopian backdrop. Juliet heads to the interim mayor Bernard's office for a briefing, but stops by Marnes' dead corpse to take a piece of paper from his pocket that has Kennedy circled. During the briefing, we can finally put a face to Billings as we get our first introductions to him. They're discussing the recent murder of Marnes, and Bernard suggests that they may have a joint funeral because Marnes and previous Mayor Johns were in love, and this will also act as a distraction from the fact that Marnes was murdered to the wider silo. Sims, who was also present in the meeting, opposes this and states that it's in breach of the pact. I mean, this guy just runs on process and regulation, doesn't he? It's almost like biblical guidelines for judicial rather than just a general set of rules to keep people safe, which I feel is how the rest of the silo views the pact. But Billings, who is also from judicial, is conveniently appointed as Marnes' replacement within 30 seconds of his death and flexes his knowledge of the pact throughout various points in the episode, which gives us an insight into the importance that this department places on it compared to others. Sims reluctantly gives in to the suggestion though, and we get the burial scene next, which has a few things which niggle me a little bit in it. So for example, why are they burying 2 decomposing bodies next to a bunch of apple trees? I take it that they're just for decoration and they're not actually going to eat. Okay, never mind. The second annoying thing is they've got a brass band playing some somber music over the background of the scene. First of all, this is a euphonium, so why is a French horn sound coming out of it? Also, you're moving your valves at the complete wrong time or when the note's being produced. From a musician's perspective, it just screams fake, and I can't stand it when sound effects are overlaid completely wrong. However, I did like the direction of the funeral. It was uncomfortable, and Bernard made some bumbling misplaced jokes that didn't land, and Juliet gave a really bad impromptu speech, which was awkward and lacked any emotion. I guess it echoed how hollow the true meaning of the funeral was. It was a way to neutralise any panic from residents of the silo that there had been 2 murders and to throw the mere mortals of civilization off the scent. And then we're introduced to Hank, yet another police deputy who's going to help Julia search for the killer of George. Like, how many people do we need to assist Julia at this point? First Holston, then Marnes, and now Big Hank's going to give her a helping hand. I feel like now we're in episode 5, certain elements of the previous episodes that have been shut down should not be repeated again. It just slows the pacing of the whole series down. My frustrations with this were only further accentuated when Juliet's PA comes into her office and says everything in this office goes through me, and if she wants to find out who killed George, she wants Juliet to find out who killed Marnes. I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot in these reviews. Why does somebody always want help with finding out why insert person here has died? It's just getting a little bit rinse and repeat now for my liking. For example, what's happened to this search for the door that George alluded to, which is a back exit to the outside world? The writers have stuck an almighty pin in that, but I guess we'll just have to remain patient. One notable thing about Billings is his exaggerated knowledge of the pact. Things have to be done in a strict process in the silo. If they find out who killed Marnes, but it's done unlawfully, judicial will throw the case out. I guess this adds more weight to why Sims was so against a joint burial for Johns and Marnes at the start, because it contradicts the status quo of how things are done in the silo, and any deviation to this is seen as a big no-no. But Juliet begins her own private investigation investigation into who flatlined Marnes and tells Billings, who is tagging along at this point, to go home for lunch so she can have some alone time. She looks at the paper at this point that she took from the pocket of Marnes at the scene of the crime, and the name Kennedy is circled. She visits this address and uses her lockpicking 100 skill to find out that there's evidence there that suggests he's the killer, which is a picture of Mayor Johns, although this is later revealed that it's Kennedy's old address. However, Billings doesn't actually go home. He heads straight to Judicial to speak with Sims, but in a later scene he admits this right away to Juliet, which was quite surprising. He states that Judicial get reports by people who don't actually officially exist as residents at the silo, and none of what they say is admissible in court, but they can provide suggestions. And the name of Ralph Melby comes to light, who is a non-existing informant for Judicial. Juliet thinks that this is a play by Sims and Billings, though, to make Juliet arrest the wrong person, look incompetent, and then get sent back to mechanical. This was substantiated when a member of Judicial, Doug Trumbull, is seen at Kennedy's house whilst Juliet beat him to the location. I did really enjoy this scene, to be honest, and I thought that this turn of events was brilliant. Juliet is finally one step ahead for the first time, and she knows Judicial have now planted that evidence in the apartment that he's banging on. The episode is then finally injected with a bit of action, and this standoff results in a foot chase that sees a struggle between Juliet and Doug before he finally gets away. At last, I was on the edge of my seat for the first time, but that was nothing compared to this next scene. After shaking off Juliet, Doug goes down to the utility section of the silo, where Sims comes out of a janitorial door. He seems quite perplexed as to why Doug's there and asks if he was following him. Doug is an admirer of Sims, and he really wants to be his shadow in the silo, which is where you're an apprentice to somebody to learn their trade and to one day take over the reins of that role. Sims then begins to give this epic monologue about how he's annoyed at Doug for making a mess with George and Marnes, suggesting that he's the killer who was ordered by Sims to carry out the assassinations. But in this kind, soft voice, he goes on to say that he's also made some mistakes in the past and that he's looking for somebody who is determined and driven to be his future shadow. So Sims then begins to swear in Doug to be his assigned shadow, before then spearing him off the side of the catwalk, only to plummet to his death at the bottom of the silo. Brutal. I've been clamoring for a bit of action from Sims since the pilot episode, and he's finally started to bare his claws. I think the director did a great job at not telegraphing this too much to the audience. The scene starts off quite intense, then it mellows out as Sims forgives Doug and explains how he's also made mistakes, but then it does a complete 180 and it ends in disaster. It was a definite highlight for myself in this episode. The penultimate scene sees Juliet in Walk's office after being granted 2 days off from Bernard. It's only now that we're getting a continuation from episode 4's final scene, where Walk was opening up the camcorder. She shows Juliet some of the internal componentry and how intricate it is, before Juliet says she needs the right bait to open up an investigation into George's death. She then goes back to their underground hideout and picks up what I believe to be a sweet dispenser. And that's kind of it for this episode. I think overall the danger of Silo is there's quite a few plot lines going on at once, and it's really difficult to progress them all concurrently without pausing others. For example, why do we keep introducing characters, developing them, then they're killed off an hour later and replaced with another character with the same motivations? I want to see more of the underground bunker that George showed Juliet, which has all the relics and the huge excavation machine. And why has Juliet not gone anywhere near the water again since the end of episode 2? But I'm sure all of these questions will be addressed in later episodes or as we approach the season 1 finale. So that's been it for this recap and review. Please let me know all your thoughts and opinions down below in the comment section, and don't forget to subscribe to our other project, The Horror Exchange. I've been your host, Hugh from Unleash the Ghouls, and I'll see you next week down below in the silo.